We're often really drawn in by the promise of altruism, right? These organizations trying to tackle huge global problems through, collaboration and innovation.
Absolutely. But sometimes the biggest gaps, the biggest letdowns are actually found inside those very organizations.
Exactly. And that's what we're looking at today. We're doing a deep dive into Altru Institute. It presents itself as this nonprofit all about global teamwork and finding new solutions.
hmm And this isn't just scratching the surface. We're basing this on recent articles by RVL Simmons, who was actually a really key contributor at Altru for a while.
Yeah, and those articles paint a picture of a pretty big difference between the public face of Altru and what was apparently going on behind the scenes.
So for you listening, our mission here is really to unpack the ethics of how Altru operated, especially how they treated contributors and this disconnect between their image and the reality RVL described.
We've gone through the details, and honestly, there are some genuinely surprising things, some real aha moments coming up.
Okay, so let's dive in. RVL's first piece, The Altru Illusion, it made some pretty serious claims based on their time there. What were the headlines?
Well, Arviel talked about making huge contributions. We're talking C-level type responsibilities, building their whole initial digital setup, even developing AI tools.
So significant work, foundational stuff.
Foundational, exactly. But despite all that, the experience was apparently marked by, well, systemic underpayment, basically no credit for the work, and when they tried to sort things out, just evasion.
Right, and after these claims came out, Altru's CEO, Brett Johnson, he responded. And according to the sources, his response, well, it tells its own story.
That's one way to put it. Brett's main concern, Arviel documented this, it wasn't really about the unpaid work or the IP issues.
No, what was it then?
His immediate and repeated focus was apparently just getting Arviel to take down the Medium article that exposed all this.
Ah, okay, so image management over addressing the substance of the claims.
That's how it looks. It really seems to highlight a priority on controlling the narrative rather than fixing the underlying problems.
And the communication tactics Brett allegedly used, they're quite something. It wasn't about accountability, it seems.
Not really, no. Arvell described Brett using these vague apologies, terrible misunderstanding, or the classic, we both share some blame.
The blame shifting.
Yeah, but it went further. Brett also apparently brought up his own personal money troubles, said he was on the ropes, facing eviction, accounts overdrawn, things like that.
Which kind of frames the situation in a particular way, doesn't it? It makes it seem like maybe Altru's issues were just bad luck, or maybe tries to downplay the value of the work done.
Exactly. And in one really telling example, Brett apparently reframed earlier payments not as professional fees, but as just grocery money.
Wow. Grocery money. That really minimizes the professional contribution.
Totally. It feels like an attempt to shift it from a professional arrangement to something charitable. Armiel even mentioned the term DARVO being used. Deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. Seems like a pattern to avoid taking responsibility.
And crucially, this doesn't seem to be just RVL's experience. The sources suggest this was maybe part of a wider pattern at Altru.
Yes, this is where it gets, well, even more concerning. RVL mentions that other key people at Altru privately confirmed similar treatment.
Oh, really?
Yeah, one former contributor, called Anonymous in the articles, who worked on Altru's hydrogen consortium, reported basically the same things. Underpayment, promises that weren't kept, being left in a financially shaky spot because deals weren't honored.
Okay, so corroboration from someone else inside Altru. That definitely suggests it wasn't just a one-off misunderstanding. It points more towards systemic leadership issues.
Absolutely. Anonymous even apparently talked to Brett directly, expressed disappointment about the lack of accountability. They even suggested that sorting things out with RVL might have helped.
Makes sense.
And Anonymous also backed up this point about Brett seeming reluctant to actually formalize contracts. That keeps coming up. This pattern of welcoming big contributions but avoiding the paperwork, the accountability, it really flags potential problems at the top.
Let's talk about the money side of things, too, because the way payments were handled raises some ethical questions.
This part is genuinely odd. RVO got paid through something called Healthcare Investment Digests, HID.
Okay.
But the weird thing is, this HID entity, it seems to have no clear legal registration, no public profile, basically zero online presence.
Huh. So why would payments from Altru Institute, a supposed nonprofit, come through this obscure third party? That is strange.
Right. Even if it was Brett's personal money, somehow the lack of transparency is, well, it's a concern.
And connecting that to Altru's overall financial transparency or lack thereof, other red flags pop up,
They
right?
do. Altru calls itself a U.S. 501c4. Those usually have to make their tax forms, the Form 990s, public.
Right, you can usually look those up.
But Altru's filings seem to be missing. And there are inconsistencies with their listed business addresses, too. It all adds to this feeling of opacity, lack of openness.
And this lack of transparency is pretty stark when you compare it to what Altru seems to be doing. Despite the CEO claiming money troubles, the organization was apparently showing up at places like Davos, hosting global events. Those aren't cheap.
Exactly. It's a major contradiction. On one hand, you have these claims of being broke, facing eviction. On the other, they're operating in these really expensive arenas.
So you have to ask, where were the resources actually going?
And were the people who built the foundation, the contributors like RVL, misled about Altru's actual ability to pay them fairly? That reported timing, announcing an expansion to Ibiza, then shortly after claiming to be on the ropes, that really damages credibility.
Okay, let's shift focus slightly to another really critical ethical point from the sources. The apparent erasure of the people who actually built Altru's infrastructure.
This is huge. Because, as the sources stress, organizations like Altru, especially ones claiming to be tech-focused, they don't just appear magically.
No, platforms are built by actual people, people with skills, with vision.
But if you look at Altru's public stuff, their website, Davos Materials, reports there's a big gap. The names of the people who actually designed the databases, built the surveys, developed the AI narratives, they're just gone.
And the sources suggest this wasn't just an accident like forgetting to add names to a list. It feels more like a deliberate pattern.
It does. Who built those databases? Who architected the surveys? Who shaped the AI strategy? Those people seem to be missing from the official story.
And what's really interesting is that Brett himself apparently acknowledged a lot of this privately.
Right. He reportedly talked about complex systems and co-created content in private messages, but then publicly downplayed it, like describing Altru's tech as just a simple Wix, CMS, and Excel, Google Sheets, etc.
But that apparently contradicts earlier internal plans. Plans he co-authored with these uncredited people for much more sophisticated platforms, data systems, AI integration.
Exactly. So the private acknowledgement versus the public downplaying, it's very revealing.
And it goes beyond just bad manners, right?
Yeah.
Attribution, giving credit, especially in the nonprofit world where trust is everything. It's fundamental for accountability.
It absolutely is. And this pattern seems wider than just RVL. Other former collaborators reportedly had similar experiences. Underpaid, roles minimized or ignored, contracts ghosted, Brett refusing to publicly acknowledge their work.
So the public story becomes Altru, as Brett's solo act of altruism.
Kind of, yeah. Which completely ignores the strategists, the tech people, the researchers, the AI collaborators who put in work, often on unpaid prototypes, based on promises of future recognition that just evaporated.
Which brings us neatly to that whole data infrastructure issue. Brett's reported comment about using a simple Wix CMS and Excel-sick Google Sheets for a global connector. That's concerning.
It's more than concerning. It's a massive red flag for anyone. Investors, partners, contributors who bought into Altru's image as a sophisticated tech platform.
Because they marketed themselves with things like a global climate directory, global database of water solutions, a partnering app, expert matching, stuff that sounds pretty advanced.
Stuff that usually needs serious tech behind it. You know, proper databases, secure APIs for connecting systems, encryption, analytics, not just spreadsheets. An API, for listeners, is basically how different software talks to each other.
So the contrast between the promise, this robust data architecture, and the reported reality of Wix and spreadsheets is stark. It suggests a potential misrepresentation of what they could actually do.
Totally. Simple tools are fine for small things, but for the volume and complexity Altru claimed, it's a huge liability. Think about data integrity. Spreadsheets break easily.
Scalability, too. Spreadsheets just choke on large data sets.
And then security and privacy. Basic tools awfully don't meet the standards needed for handling potentially sensitive data. Think GDPR, IGPA, that kind of thing.
Plus, how do you integrate sophisticated AI, like they claimed, with just spreadsheets? AI tools usually need those APIs, structured data. It just doesn't work.
Right. And ultimately using such basic tools when you claim otherwise, it just shreds your credibility.
And the sources mentioned there was an offer to build something better, a proper, scalable, secure system.
Yes, apparently. A relational database, APIs, security layers. the works. RVL reportedly contributed to this plan, but it was turned down.
Why?
The reported reasons. Brett wasn't comfortable with the technical complexity and maybe an unwillingness to properly value that kind of external expertise.
Which has real ethical implications, especially for things like their global water survey.
Yeah.
People get their data thinking it's secure and will be used well.
Exactly. But if it's just going into online forms linked to spreadsheets, where is it going? Are there proper safeguards, audit trails, compliance? It's not just tech. It's about ethically handling people's information.
Okay, finally, let's look at Brett's direct responses when RVL made formal demands for resolution. The analysis of his concluding paragraphs in the sources. It's quite revealing.
It really is. His reported response seems full of contradictions, blame shifting, manipulation.
He apparently apologized again for not being able to pay, but then shifted blame onto RVL. Even used phrases that sound like gaslighting, like, "You were never mistreated. That is life."
Wow.
Quite the mix. Accusing RVL of extortion, promising rewards if Altru becomes profitable later, blaming RVL's social media for Altru's problems.
He even apparently said he was too busy to review formal proposals while still demanding the Medium article be removed.
And that conditional offer of help, like, "I can help you, but only if you stop trying to destroy me," feels incredibly manipulative.
It's really striking, though, is that amidst all the denials and deflections, he reportedly did confirm some key things RVL raised.
Like what?
Like the inability to pay someone at a C-level, the ongoing financial instability, being uncomfortable with formal contracts and underpaying multiple people. He admitted those things, implicitly or explicitly.
So, damaging admissions mixed with denials of things where there's apparently clear evidence, like RVL's background, the system's built, using the AI work.
Exactly. And always circling back to getting that article taken down rather than actually fixing the problems. The narrative just doesn't seem to hold together consistently.
And maybe the most crucial takeaway here, despite all the talk of being broke.
Is that basic human decency doesn't cost a dime.
Precisely. Acknowledging contributions, treating people fairly, being transparent, those are ethical baseline requirements. They don't depend on the bank balance.
Which leaves us with this core tension, doesn't it? An organization shouting about altruism and global impact.
But seemingly acting in self-serving ways internally and actively trying to erase the people who helped build it. Based on these reports, of course.
So the thought we want to leave you with is this. When does chasing a noble goal maybe tip over into actions that are ethically questionable?
And what's the true cost of that innovation, that collaboration, if it comes at the expense of the very people providing the skills and time without fair treatment or recognition?
It certainly raises big questions about transparency and accountability, not just for Altru, but maybe for the nonprofit sector more broadly, something to think about.
Definitely. And if you want to dig deeper into this specific case, we recommend checking out RVL Simmons' articles over on Medium for their full perspective.